everyone, and welcome back to Todos Santos. Today we're going to be moving south of the river to set the stage for a few builds that we're going to do in the near future, which are the university, the city's main cargo port, and the city's main transit services. But first we have to set the stage for those by doing a little bit of highway work and a little bit of rail extension. So we have this main north-south freeway that runs almost all the way through the heart of the city. I thought what better way to divide these two areas than to put up an elevated freeway. So I just wanted to make sure that all the nodes lined up so that the highway pillars also lined up. That's a lot easier than going in and manually placing down pillar props, although of course sometimes that is required nonetheless. But I just wanted to do as little work as possible in terms of getting those pillars to line up. And then I'm just connecting up this stack interchange. Now, I'm by no means an expert in this sort of thing, but it seems to me to be a pretty significant issue of how do you connect interchanges like this to service roads, because you end up needing a lot of ramps to make sure that cars can go in every direction from any possible input. So whether they're on a freeway or a surface road, they need to be able to get going in all the various directions. And so that's an issue I encountered here as I added these frontage roads, which are going to run parallel to this entire stretch of freeway and feed all the traffic into the areas we're going to be working on. So basically what I ended up doing is just adding on and off ramps to each area and kind of snaking them into these empty green spaces that you can see here. It's kind of a tedious process because obviously when you're making tons of nodes with this sort of thing, you have to give it a lot of TLC with node controller and move it. But if you keep massaging with move it and increasing the corner offset and using the sloped node functions of node controller, you're eventually going to be able to get something that looks fairly realistic and doesn't look so much like a roller coaster. Although I will say that on the few occasions I've driven over one of these things, it does kind of feel like being on a roller coaster, just a little bit. But that's really beside the point. Basically, I'm trying to make these slopes as smooth as possible by using long stretches of road, using the slope object function and move it, and then making any nodes that I can be sloped with node controller. Now you can't always do that on this sort of interchange because when you have two roads going at different angles that are also sloping in different directions, if you use the slope node feature, it's going to kind of twist the roads and make them look really weird. But if you have two roads going in a very similar direction and they're both going up or down, then you can use the slope node function and you're going to get it looking nice and smooth. Now, obviously you can see all this weird warped terrain here. We're not going to get to that this episode, but we're going to come back in a future episode and do our best to beautify this area, well, as much as you can beautify something like this. Okay, now we're moving on to the other end of the freeway, closer to downtown, and we're just going to put in some simple on and off ramps here. I'm trying to bring the ramps as close as I can to the freeway, just to take up as little real estate as I can. I just think it looks cool to have this kind of development smushed in as close as it can, because this is going to be a fairly dense area next to the university, which, by the way, is what we're going to be doing next episode and the episode after that. But there's going to be a whole dense district around it, so I didn't want to take up too much real estate just with these ramps. Now, it's always difficult to do that kind of build because you get these really sharp angles where you connect the ramps up with the freeway. And this is where, of course, node controller comes in handy. So basically what I do is I try to make sure everything's level where the nodes actually are and the surrounding nodes, both in the freeway and the ramps. And that just makes it easier so you don't have to worry about these ugly slopes like I mentioned before. And then I just bring the corner offset way up on the node where the ramp meets the freeway and do a little bit of massaging with move it. Sometimes you'll get weird terrain glitching through. Usually that's fine. Sometimes it seems to indicate that there's like a weird problem with the node or the surrounding segment and cars actually will like slow way down when they try to go through it. I'm not sure exactly what causes that, but it seems to usually be correlated with two nodes that are really close together. So often you'll be able to go in and just search around with move it and find two nodes that are really close to one another and just pull them apart a little bit. And that'll generally solve your problem. Now you might notice that these intersection markings I'm doing here aren't quite the right color. That's going to be fixed not too far in the future when I'm going to come through and replace most of our freeway assets with something a little bit more consistent. Because obviously the Roads United texture pack I'm using is a little outdated, and so we're going to be replacing that eventually. So don't worry too much about that. This is something that I have been avoiding for quite a while, but it's time that we addressed it. So we have this metro line that runs from the downtown and runs right through the middle of the main freeway. And I didn't want to have like a big sweeping elevated curve because that's just a little bit too high key of an infrastructure project for the city. I think, as I mentioned before, I want to keep it fairly low key. Although I'm actually going to be kind of violating that rule as soon as later in the episode, but let's get to that when it's time. But anyway, I also didn't want to completely reconfigure this freeway and the stack interchange to have the metro run through the center. So what I end up doing is sinking it down across the length of that bridge, and it's going to run under the freeway for a little bit. And then from there, we'll figure that out later. But it was a little too steep of a slope at the start, so I had to adjust that. Unfortunately, that means I had to get rid of this very beautiful elevated station and replace it with something a little simpler. There aren't any details here that you can see, but you'll see in the cinematics that there are a few things that make it look like it fits in a little bit more. As it is in that shot, it looks a little bit exposed out there in the middle of the freeway, but hopefully you'll see what I mean in the cinematics. Okay, so now we're starting on what's going to be the central area of this episode, which is this station underneath the freeway. Now, I'm not sure how realistic it is to have this kind of thing under a freeway because we're going to decorate it and make it look like there's basically a building filling in this entire space down there. Regardless of whether it's realistic or not, we're doing it. Now, I've had some problems with the catenaries because I'm able to remove the normal ones that run along the actual track network itself, but for some reason that doesn't get rid of the ones that are in the stations. I assume it's something to do with it being station track, but I'm a little concerned about messing with that because I know that can cause issues. It's really a small detail that I'm not too worried about, but I just thought I'd mention it. And it might actually end up being a moot point because this is something I only realized recently, a while after I recorded this footage, is that the actual metro train that I'm using, which is technically a train in the game and not metro, because I started the city long before they had overground metros, and I did not have the metro overhaul mod installed. But anyway, the vehicle assets I'm using actually have pantographs, so it's a train that's meant to be run along under catenaries. And I had always just imagined that it was like a diesel engine or something. I don't really know much about trains, so I'm probably just waffling at this point. What I'll probably end up doing is just reinstating the catenaries because they're currently hidden, which should be fairly straightforward, I think. So I just went for the plainest commercial building I could find and copied and pasted a few of those under the freeway, just kind of look like a station entrance. Really, it's all going to be hidden. You're not meant to poke your camera around down there. Of course, we'll end up doing that at some point, but it's not going to be detailed or anything on the inside, just a very simple entrance. And then I'm blocking off the view of that with these vanilla keys here. I just think the side texture is actually really nice, so I wanted to use that here. It's pretty similar to the retaining wall assets that you can get on the workshop, but I just felt like using these for a little bit of a change of pace. And of course we have to have a couple of exterior details here, so we have a couple of maps and a couple of ticket dispensers. So I think I've mentioned this in this series before, but the metro is based on the Tren Urbano in San Juan, which is the sole metro line there. But it has this funny little feature. So it heads south fairly straight, and then it takes a pretty sharp curve to the west. And we're going to end up replicating that. So you can see what is now its terminus, where it kind of curves across the frontage road there. So that's it for the metro, for now at least. And we're going to move on to adding a brand new light rail line. And I mostly just wanted to do this for the fun and the challenge of snaking a rail line through all the development we're going to be doing. So there's going to be a lot of focus on that, and it's going to guide a lot of the decisions that we make in terms of planning all these layouts. So I initially had the light rail just return to the surface immediately from this lowered station that runs under the metro, but then I figured that this would be a pretty central road because it's the main surface road that connects this area south of the river to the main downtown area north of the river. So I didn't want to have an intersection there, so it just continues to be buried for this first little stretch. And then it comes up out of the tunnel here, and that's going to run right through the middle of the university. Of course, there's going to be another station over there that's actually in the university itself, which is going to be a lot of fun. And I figured I had this sunken area, I might as well run a road through here as well, and we're going to have some buses that run along there. Now you see that there, these kind of weird black crinkles in the road there. So when you have two networks at different elevations right next to one another, you get that, and it's really ugly and horrible. It doesn't affect the function of the road or anything, but it's not nice. Now at this point I didn't know about this mod, But there is a mod that fixes that. It just straight up removes it. It's amazing. It's called Rotterdam Road Texture Terrain Edge Remover by XLF 1024 on the workshop. I highly recommend you get this mod if you ever run into this problem. You should download it. It's awesome. It also has a few other options, like you can hide the cliff texture when you have steep terrain like this. I personally don't use that because I like to have a visual indication of when the terrain is really steep. And sometimes it's nice to just have some cliff texture built in so you don't have to detail it yourself. Now I'm just adding a little bit of wall here, a little bit of retaining wall to make the sunken rail look a little bit cooler. I just think there's something that looks so awesome about rail like coming up out of the ground in this little kind of channel like this. I also put a couple of those retaining walls under the sunken station. Now because there are two levels, there's the metro station and then the light rail station, I wanted to put an elevator here, and then I'm connecting it all the way from over there to the metro station with some invisible pedestrian paths so that they can enter in the elevator there and walk over to the metro station. And it's all hidden, so you don't see all the floating people there. And like I mentioned, it's not really meant to be seen, the interior of this area. So I'm not too worried about all the floating people. And if you've watched earlier episodes of the series, you know that the citizens of Todos Santos like to float all over the place anyway. So really, no matter what we do, we're going to have floating people around. So might as well take advantage of it. But really the point of all of that is just to make it look like one building. So they have one big station down here underneath the freeway, which I think is kind of a cool little feature to have here. So most of this elevated freeway is held up by pillars, but I just wanted to make this part a little bit different, just covering it up with some retaining walls to make it look like it's up on some concrete. So let's speed through that and move on with the episode. Now it's time to work on the road network for this area. So like I mentioned before, the next couple episodes are going to be dedicated to building the university. So this is the main road that runs through the university, because even though it's going to be a mostly pedestrian-centric area and transit-centered area, they're obviously going to need certain buildings to have vehicle access. So there is a very low-speed, low-capacity road that runs through the middle of the university. We'll get more into that when we actually do the build next episode. But I just wanted to mention that that's sort of the road design I'm going for there. And then I'm just selecting all the nodes with Move It and leveling it out to make sure we have a nice level field to work with next episode. And then we have this main intersection where these two main roads meet up. These are going to be fairly important roads moving forward as we move to the east of this area. East is to the right of screen right now. I've usually have been trying to keep the camera facing north just so everything stays nicely oriented. Of course, that's not always possible. And one downside to that is that facing north also means we're facing the downtown and we're facing the big tourist area, all of which lowers my frame rates every time I have a low angle on the camera. So sometimes I do find myself facing south just for my own sanity with better frames per second. So just keep that in mind. I will try to point out which direction is which whenever I bring that up. So hopefully I can be consistent with that. So the district surrounding the university is going to be a mix of medium density, commercial, office, and residential, tapering down to some low density residential areas, which I really should just start calling neighborhoods. I don't know why I keep calling them that, but no matter what I call them, I'm going to put down some road networks for them now. I just picked a random point in San Juan, pulled up the road network on Google Maps, and kind of glanced over at it occasionally to try to get some inspiration on how to lay these roads out. So I'm going to turn the music up just a little bit, and I'll see you in a moment. Now that we've got the bulk of the road network laid out, I just wanted to do a little bit of filling in so we're not left with a completely blank road network to work with next episode. So there's a hill right in the center of the area here, much like the hills we made back in episode number 21, I think. It's not quite as big, but I just thought it would be kind of cool to have a few of these scattered around the city where they have hills that they just haven't wanted to develop for whatever reason, or maybe has been developed in the past and has since had a forest replanted and is now just used as green space or park or what have you. Now this is where the University light rail station is going to be. There's a little pullout here, which I think looks kind of cool due to the angle of the road. Being about 45 degrees to the angle of the rail line. Kind of have this little corner pull out here, which is going to be for people being picked up and dropped off, and also for a couple of bus lines that we're going to run through here. I also put a crosswalk there. We're going to develop all of this, and it's going to make sense once we start building the university. There are going to be lots of things like this with little pullouts and crosswalks and all that sort of stuff. But like I said, I just wanted to lay the groundwork for that. I also established the actual light rail line here. It's called the University line for obvious reasons. I always like to get the actual transit lines running as soon as I can because I love seeing all the vehicles driving around. Now we're going to put some buildings down. So this is approximately the western border of the university here. There's just a single line of development here, mixed use, commercial, and residential. There might be a little bit of office in there as well. But I was just eager to fill in this area because I thought it was so cool to have just this little bit of development on top of the buried rail line. So I just wanted to get that filled in and ready to go to give the builder doing next episode a nice bit of context. Now I wasn't sure exactly how to fit this building in here next to the tunnel that pops up. So I put a little path that runs through there. We're going to connect that up with the main university path system. Which is going to be very satisfying, I think. So I'm using a mix of different styles, but trying to skew a little bit older, because this university that we're going to build, I think probably would have popped up around the maybe early 20th century, something like that. So in terms of the architecture, we're jumping back a little bit from the sort of development that we have between here and the Old Town. Obviously, the Old Town is several centuries old. This is about a century old. Obviously, there are some newer buildings mixed in as things have been redeveloped, but there's a lot of Art Deco and some other sorts of older buildings that you would find in an area like this. Some of them are from the Art Deco Content Creator Pack, which is a nice little DLC, and some of the others are some of the absolutely amazing assets that we have available to us on the workshop. And you can find a link to those down in the description if you're interested. I have 3 mod lists. One is for actual mods, one is for building assets, and one is for all the other assets that I use in this city. Now I have this kind of wide sidewalk here, and this is something that I haven't been doing much of in the game for some reason, but I think having wider walkways like this can really make these areas feel a little bit more pedestrian friendly and a little bit more realistic, because often you'll get wider sidewalks than some of these really skinny roads allow you to get. So on the one side we have the sunken rail with the retaining walls, and then on the other side it's a little bit less developed, so we still have the wide sidewalk, but I'm using a retaining wall with grass on top instead, and then we're going to put, what else, some trees up there. And we're actually going to fill in quite a few of the gaps between the development and the freeway with a forest like that. Well, forest might be a bit of a strong word, but you never know when it's me who's putting down the trees. And then I'm just establishing a little bit of a palette that we're going to work from when we build the university with these green fences, certain types of palm trees, and just filling in all these little gaps with little spaces of greenery. I end up trying to go for a mix of some places that look a little bit more wild and some places that look a little bit more landscaped and well-maintained. Sometimes they're a bit of both, like that one. Now I had this little awkward square in between the freeway and what will soon be the campus, so I'm just going for a mix of low to medium density houses of various styles, because again, this is a fairly old region, so kind of like the island, there have been different sorts of development over the years. So I just continued the same sort of building plopping across this whole square and came up with this. That's just a small sample of the kind of stuff we're going to be doing next episode. But before that, we have to finish this one with a little bit of lighting, of course. Really, it was already pretty well lit, mostly just the street lamps and the lights built into the buildings themselves. But the station, of course, was completely dark, so I needed to add a few fairly utilitarian-looking lamps down here. just to make sure everyone can see what they're doing and not fall into the light rail track, which I think is something generally considered not good. Also, I kind of like how the metro track sticks out above there. I don't know, kind of cool. I don't know how realistic that kind of station is, but it's what we have. And then here's something that for some reason I had never noticed in the game before. The transit view at night looks very, very cool, especially when you have a big city with lots of different transit buildings in it. One thing that happens when you have long nodes like this that you extend with node controller is they don't automatically put down the street lamps that the street normally gets, so you have to go in and plop them manually. Maybe there's a mod to fix that, I don't know. And then we just needed to add in a university bus line to complement our university light rail line. This ends up being a very important east-west bus line, the main east-west bus line, in fact, for this part of the city that's south of the river. It gives us a lot of opportunities for interesting bus stops and also causes some consternation, as we'll see quite a bit later in this series. But for now, I'd like to thank you so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to see you on the next one, where we're going to be building the university. Bye-bye!
Thank you.